Let's suppose we had the following array. What is one way in which we can iterate over this array? Well, when you're first learning JavaScript, you're probably familiar with the for loop. The for loop allows us to iterate over each item in an array. So we're familiar with this. What is another way in which we could iterate over this array and display the results? Well, the array.forEach is another method that we can use. So this is the syntax for the array.forEach. We take the variable for the array and we do .forEach. Let's go ahead and run this. And it works as expected. We can also do the following. We can take the array and attach the .forEach method. Let's go ahead and run this. And again, it works as we would expect. The array.forEach requires a callback function. The callback function have three parameters. First, we have the element. Next, we have the index of the array. And lastly, we have the array itself. Let's go ahead and console log out each one of these parameters. Now, if we use the arrow function, we will have to put the curly braces there. So we'll add the curly braces. We'll put element, index, let's do the element and index first. Let's go ahead and run this. And you can see that as it iterates over the array, it prints out the actual element and the index of each one. The last parameter, as we may mention, is just the array value itself. Let's go ahead and console log that. Now, the array.forEach doesn't allow us to modify the original array. You may ask yourself, am I able to do the following? And the answer is no. As we may mention, the array.forEach doesn't modify the original array. If we wanted to do that, we would have to do the following. We can add another array and then push those elements to that array and then finally console log those items out. However, there's a better way in which we could do that, and we'll look at that in another video. What is the difference between the for loop and the array.forEach loop? Well, one big difference is that in the for loop, you can break out of the iteration. Let's look at the following code. On line number 5, I have if the index of the array is equal to 15 to break out of the iteration. Let's go ahead and give this a try. You can see that once it reaches 15, it breaks out of the loop. Can we do the same thing in the for each loop? The answer is no. Let's go ahead and comment out this code and uncomment out this. And let's give this a shot. Right away, JavaScript tells us that there's an illegal break statement. We are unable to use the break statement to break out of the for each loop. Well, you may ask, what if I use the keyword return? Will that work? No, it will not work. As you can see, it continues on in the iteration. There is no way to break out of the array.forEach loop. There are some other key differences in why you would use the array.forEach rather than the for loop. In most cases, it will be in your best interest to use the array.forEach loop. So now we're in our code editor and we see that we have an array with two objects. Each object has a property, values of name, job title, and image. We can use the array.forEach to iterate over these items. Now, let's just go to our index.html. We have on line number 27 a div with the ID of content. Now, suppose we wanted to insert these values into our index.html. We can use the following code. Here we have an empty string, and we iterate over the array object. We declare a new variable called div, and we have a string template. We insert the values of each of the items inside of our object, the image, the name, and the job title. We add our div to our content, and on line number 29, we add our content to our HTML element. Let's take a look at the final results. So here we're inside of our web browser. We can see in our lower right-hand corner the two objects that we iterated over. We can look inside of our HTML and see that this is the first card and the second card. We were able to use the Array.forEach to loop over our JSON object. Could we have used a for loop to do the same thing? Yes. However, using the Array.forEach shows that we understand JavaScript and its methods. It's also easier to look at than having a ton of for loops in our code. And I'll tell you now, if you go on a job interview and you have to iterate over an array, please use the Array.forEach and not the for loop.